Hey everyone, this is Editing Peter. I'm sharing this special episode, especially because we're about to hit the 10 episode mark. Just be aware that this is one of the first episodes I ever recorded with my lovely wife Julia, so things might sound a little different than normal. Enjoy! Okay, welcome to Catching Up, the podcast where conversations don't end when the bell rings. I'm Peter Ng, educator, lifelong learner, and someone who believes that some of the most important conversations happen after the classroom door closes. On the show, I reconnect with former students, colleagues, and friends to reflect on who they were and what they're becoming and what they've learned along the way. Today, I'm joined by Julia Porcher, who is now not just my beautiful wife, but is also a plan compliance consultant for a retirement plan administration company, if we wanted to be more specific with that. Uh, we'll talk a little bit more about that later as far as her position and understanding a little more on that note. But let's go ahead and get into it. Julia, if you want to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Julia. I am Peter's lifelong partner. As he says, he's a lifelong learner. I'm his lifelong partner.
Okay, fair enough. I appreciate that. On the topic, I guess, of just what you're up to in your day today, could you explain to someone who doesn't know what this position is, what the idea of a plan compliance consultant is?
Sure. So, what I do for my job is that if a company has a retirement plan, I work for a company that they would outsource this portion of their work to. So, my company is known as a third party administrating firm. And so you, as in your company, would hire my company to administer your retirement plan. And so what that entails is that we would do all sorts of things for your retirement plan. We would annually calculate the retirement plan contributions. We would file the tax filings for the retirement plan, and we would also maintain the plan's documents. So we would write the documents for the plan and then maintain those annually. So that is what I do day to day. It is a lot of communication with my clients and also the work for the plans. So, working on those tax filings, working on those contributions, and then the plan documents, whatever is needed for those as well.
Interesting. I appreciate you sharing some information about your profession. Would you say that something like plan compliance and working in this field, what percentage would you say is more like a hard skill? So, like, let's say, like mathematics or accounting esque type work versus soft skills, like you said, working with your clients directly?
For sure. I would say probably, hmm, probably 30 to 40% of it's maybe hard skills. And then, 60 to 70% is soft skills. It is a lot of that communication aspect. Usually, when my company unfortunately has to let somebody go, it's because they're not necessarily excelling at that soft skills aspect of it, which is that like client communication aspect of it. So that is a really big factor of why someone in my role would really succeed. And when somebody does well, they do really well. The hard skills as well, they play such an important factor. But it's so funny. Like this afternoon, for instance, I was on a call with a client, and there were two representatives from this client. And it was a Microsoft Teams call, so I was face to face with them. But I was doing some live calculations for them. So I was literally pulling out a TI business calculator and live doing some calculations for them with this calculator. So it was kind of, a blending of both worlds, right? And it wasn't really hard calculations at all.
Sure.
But it was showing off my basic math skills and the fact that I knew what I was doing, while blending together those soft people skills. So I believe in the end it's probably, between that 30 to 40% hard skills and 60 to 70% soft skills.
Okay. And I'm sure that moment where you like just pulled out a calculator to show something to your clients, like you said, it wasn't necessarily something that was super complex mathematically, but that does kind of humanize a little bit that you're trying to bridge something with your client. Something that I think is similar for what I see as a teacher is there'll be times I get questions that frankly don't know, and I think it's the right thing to do to say, yeah, I'm not sure. Let's look it up together, or let's work through this together. So that's awesome that you get to do that. I guess one final question on this topic. Certainly, the hard skill stuff, you got to get trained and guided through to learn how to manage everything and properly input everything. In your experience with your profession, have you learned any new or have you adapted any of those soft skills, or do you feel like this is more just what comes natural to you and you just kind of play to your strengths?
It's definitely come with time, especially with the field of work that I'm in. There are certain ways of phrasing things that I've had to pick up on over the years, that haven't necessarily come naturally and that I wouldn't know right away. But I think some of it is more intrinsic, to me personally, with that soft skills aspect of it. That is something of, I would phrase something this way to a client. That could just be, oh, I think they mean things this way. And so I'm going to respond this way. Or, just even my upbringing, like my parents instilled in me a very, be very polite to people and things like that. So I'm always going to be very polite to people. And honestly, just living my life and honestly, just being in a relationship, and just thinking like, maybe I shouldn't always reply right away. Like sometimes I even write an email back when something's gotten me angry, but I don't send the email right away. Maybe I take half an hour or an hour, and sit on it. And then just once I'm not in the heat of the moment anymore, I then rewrite the email. But that's not necessarily something that I've had intrinsically, but it's something that comes with time and maturity, or being in a relationship, therapy, like all these different things that I didn't necessarily
Sure.
have at the start of my career. But like I mentioned, other things that I think that I did have at the start of a career, like my parents raising me a certain way. So I think it's a blend of all sorts of things that for these soft skills that I do have. Yeah, just they come from all over, I guess.
Yeah, understandable. And it often just comes with experience. And some people, it clicks faster. And for others, it's something that really is a monumental task. So, the structure of this podcast is intended, as you heard in the intro, to be a way to reconnect with people, and especially former students of mine who I've had the pleasure and opportunity of teaching over this decade or so of being a teacher. So some of these questions are certainly more tailored towards your past and how you were in high school. And, I certainly did not know you back then. So this is something that is a little bit of a learning opportunity for me too. But I see here you graduated in 2012. So if I did my math correctly, that means you started in 2009.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes. Is that correct?
4 years of high school. Usually that's the average high school experience.
Correct. But I started in 2008. I was a freshman in the fall of 2008.
Okay. Well, I'm not a math teacher. So either way,
Need to work on those
we
hard
got some
skills, baby.
questions. Yeah, it's okay. We have some questions here that are more oriented around that, and kind of takes a little bit of a history lesson, or I guess, or just a review of things back then. Um, so, what did you think your life would look like when you were in high school? So let's flash back to senior year of high school. It's 2012. Um, Coney 2012 is going on. What else is going on in 2012? The movie, the 2012 disaster film was coming out. The Mayan calendar. A lot of things were going on at the time.
Hmm.
But what did you think your life would look like? Let's say 5 years from then, 10 years from
Of
then.
course. So in high school, I was really involved in a club at my high school known as Model United Nations. As I know you were back in your high school, obviously different high schools. We didn't know
That's
each other,
correct.
but we have discussed it. But I was very involved in Model United Nations, and I went into college and started my college journey, um, thinking that it was something that I wanted to pursue. I had a very, I guess, international minded, or I guess mind just in general, starting college. I wanted to study abroad, and I began an international relations major. And I finished an international relations major, but that was my mindset going into college. So I think starting college and graduating high school, I wanted to be a diplomat of the world. I wanted to um, perhaps work at the State Department, be someone who traveled the world for their job, for a living. Um, and that did not happen. That was not my path in the end. I ended up not studying abroad during college just because of life circumstances. Um, and, I have traveled the world, but not certainly not for work. I work from home,
Yep.
so quite literally, really the opposite of traveling for work. But yeah, just during my college career, that was not the path for me. But that's what I quite envisioned my life to be, I think, when I was graduating high school.
Gotcha. Okay. So you had very wanderlust esque ideals or ambitions back in high school, at least, of what your future might hold for you. And like what happens to many of us, things didn't necessarily go as planned, which is expected. I don't think it's normal for someone's life to be so uh, well designed and follow a super strict structure. Um, Back when you're in that time, though, like in the high school era, teenage years, big time of development and discovery. What was something you'd consider you were very confident about?
Hmm. I think I was very confident in my smarts, honestly. I knew I was very intelligent. And then I think also, and I don't know if this is the right way to phrase it, but in my responsibility, like my sense of responsibility, um, when I was in high school, I babysat a lot. And that was my, job in a sense, but babysitting is a lot of work. Like a, a family puts their child or children in your
Yeah, for
care
sure.
for good amount of time, right? And I babysat for many families around my neighborhood and things like that. And I was a very trusted babysitter, things of that nature. And I was doing this, almost every single weekend for a good portion of my high school career. So I was very responsible. And I really didn't step out of line in high school a lot. I was a very responsible um, teenager of sorts.
Mhm.
Um, and just because of things going on at home, I was just very responsible.
Did you feel like you were
I guess
quite
so.
mature
I
for
mean,
your age? Like if you compared yourself to your friends and your peers at the time, did you feel like you were just another teenager, or it's not too uncommon for some kids at that age to feel like they're older than
for
their
sure.
peers?
I definitely still had fun, and I wasn't, thankfully, I wasn't thrust into a position where I had to provide for my family. I wasn't, I wouldn't say that I was put in a position where I had more responsibility placed upon me, right? I did it because I wanted to. But I just, and a lot of my friends and my peers, we were all a bunch of nerds. I feel like we were all a similar level of responsible. They maybe didn't babysit as much as I did, but I feel like any one of them, not necessarily that you could put a baby in their care and they would be able to take care of it for a week, but their parents trusted them like wholeheartedly. um and they were all very responsible children,
Right.
teenagers at that point. So
So you had a strong
yeah,
social group and social circle
yeah,
that really kept each other accountable.
yeah, and I don't even know if we needed to keep each other accountable. Like there was nothing to hold each other accountable for,
Got it.
honestly.
Okay.
And I mean, you have met a good number of my friends that I
That I
that I
have.
had
They
during high
are
school.
quite the overachievers, so I see a lot
Yeah.
of the trait similarities.
Yeah.
Um, so it seems to me that you were very confident in your responsibilities and your academics, and being the fulfilling the role of a student, which is primarily the job of someone going to high school. Um, that said, was there anything at that time of your life that you were unsure of, or something that just was on the forefront of your mind of like, I don't know how I'm going to handle this or deal with this?
I mean, something that sticks out to me is, not to get morbid, but my mother was ill. And so I think her declining and questionable health was definitely something that was evident, and something that was kind of in the background of my mind, definitely all throughout high school. Um, the ebbs and flows of her illness, for sure. And then I think just certain social interactions, especially surrounding, the opposite sex and romantic situations, and just being like, oh, do they like me? Like, I think you know me today as being a very confident person and things of that nature, but that wasn't necessarily the case always. And so I think back in high school, I didn't have the level of confidence that I do in myself today. And so that, romantic, do they like me? All that kind of stuff was something that I was definitely unsure of, in high school. And I think any of my high school friends that you've met, we were all in a similar mindset back in high school.
I got you. Yeah, and it's pretty normal for kids and teenagers to be figuring things out, and not necessarily be ultra confident about the attraction and all that stuff. So that's expected for sure. So you said that originally your ideas or what you were hoping for was more international based and working and traveling often. You kind of alluded towards this, but was there a moment that changed your future and your direction, and kind of made you feel like your roots were more here in Orlando versus being someone that's a jet setter?
Yeah. So, um, honestly, it stemmed from once again my mother's illness. And once I started college, um, I realized that my her declining health was declining further, so I wouldn't necessarily have the opportunities to travel abroad as I might like to, just because of her declining health. And then also just the costs of college. I ended up becoming an RA, a resident assistant, during my time in college. And the cost of my college education was so high that I did need the pay that that work provided, that it didn't afford me to be able to go study abroad during my time during college. So that lent itself to not afford me to be able to do that. And then, regardless of even just studying abroad, because that's can be such a momentary thing, I think beyond that and wanting to work in that field specifically, I think, and this is going to sound so bleak, but I think I just became a realist at some point,
Mm,
unfortunately, during college. That I had looked at like the State Department websites and this and that, and I don't know if there was some sort of doubt within myself of I can't get this internship or do that, but I think it was a thing of Orlando is a safety blanket for me. And I don't necessarily want to leave this place. Um, and I had already secured a job once I left college that wasn't in that field. And so I just kind of stuck with what I already had. And I don't know if it was my classes specifically, but the classes that I took during college to obtain my international relations degree, they didn't necessarily warm me to the idea
mm,
of becoming somebody who traveled internationally for work. They didn't make me more interested in it like my Model
sure.
United Nations hobby did. And I even started the Model United Nations Club up at my college. Um, like I started that from the ground up at Rollins at my college. And I, traveled to New York with them for conferences and things like that. Um, and I still had so much fun doing that. But I think my classes and once it became more real, it didn't seem like something. It didn't seem, I guess, as glamorous as just these silly fake little conferences did. And so I think I just became a realist along the way, as bleak as that sounds.
I don't think that's necessarily bleak. I think there's something like that happens in virtually every field to some degree or another, where what you thought was the end goal or the end purpose of this profession or what the day to day looks like may not be as accurate as you once thought. Um, I'm not someone that that tries to think too often about regrets or thinking that you should have made a decision differently. However, I guess I have a two-part question for you. Do you feel like if things were different and there were no health concerns from a family member or your mother in this case, or costs weren't as problematic, do you feel like your life today would be so dramatically different if you had followed through with those original intentions?
Um, if I had studied abroad for a semester, I don't necessarily think my life would be so dramatically different. And I
Interesting.
can
Okay.
say that just because I've had friends who studied abroad. And I mean, everybody jokes about, somebody who studied abroad in Spain for a semester and they come back and in
Hmm.
Barcelona and all of their accents now affected because of it and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, I had all these friends who studied abroad and they had amazing experiences. Don't get me wrong. But I do not believe that their life paths have been so dramatically affected. And I can be wrong, but I don't
Sure.
believe so.
But that's good to know. It's sometimes an interesting thought experiment to have. And my part two, a quick little part two, is you mentioned a little bit of disillusionment. As you said, you claimed it was more of like a bleak factor into reality of what the profession might look like. If you could have switched degrees or selected something else, knowing what you know now, would you have studied something else or pursued a separate degree?
Possibly. I To be honest, I don't know all of the majors that my college offered. I think if they offered something along the lines of accounting, I might have done that because I enjoy what I do. And I fell into my job that I currently have. So I
Right.
do wonder if I went into how I would have succeeded or how I would have fared if I went into a or if I went into a major that dealt with more hard, not sciences, but hard, um, you know, skill sets. Yeah, skill sets. Um, and so I do, because I've always been good at math and science and things of that nature. I I, I took a calculus based physics class just for gen ed.
Hmm.
So what how would I have fared in any accounting based class that they offered? I don't even know if they did offer that.
Right.
So I'd just be interested to know how I might have done with something like that. So I think if I could go back, I would have done something that might have benefited me in that way.
Okay.
And I don't know if I would have chosen an economics major though, because the economics classes that I did take for my major, I did not love.
Yeah, and I mean that could
So
have pushed you in another
who
direction
knows?
entirely as well. And as you said,
Yeah.
sometimes you kind of just fall into certain things. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing. That was great information and learning a little more about your journey throughout your collegiate years as well. But let's go ahead and transition into one of our segments where it's a little more about what would you tell your past self. So if you could sit across from your 16-year-old self or 17 around that age, what would you tell yourself?
Am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Sure, let's go ahead and say you can.
Um, Stop giving a fuck.
Hmm.
Like, I think I was and I wasn't like so caught up in other people's opinions that it stopped me from doing things, but I do think it was a deterrent for me to do things. And so, and I can't. necessarily name things specifically off the top of my head, but I can just remember that it was something in general that held me back. Um, and so I just really, I wish that I had taken more risks with things that I did, or whatever it was.
Do you feel though, knowing who you are, knowing who you were back then, do you feel like your past version of yourself would even believe, or not believe, but like would trust you, and follow that?
I would hope so, if past me can see how amazing current me is and trust that, right? If they could see, like, hey, like, current me, she's so hot. Look at
Look at
look at
Momo
how
behind
great
you.
her life is, and she's done so well.
But do you see
Luna's
him up
down here
there?
too. Um, and yeah, I mean, I heard
Oh
him
my
jump up
God.
there. Oh, and he jumped down. Anyway, um, but look at her. She's doing so well, and she's gotten there with this advice. So it must have obviously served her well.
Okay, so I mean, I guess what I'm getting at is, even you in your high school form and your high school self as a teenager, you would have had the wherewithal or the foresight to say, okay, or to accept advice like that and say, yes, and not just necessarily question, or be like, no, I'll figure it out on my own. Do you feel like there's any advice that you might give that you're certain your past self would ignore?
That I'm certain my past self would ignore.
Or you feel like there's a higher chance that they may brush that off
I
and
mean,
say,
it's
yeah,
just
whatever,
like the
lady?
most, well, it's not advice though. I don't know. So,
I mean, it could be whatever you want to say. It could even be like, hey, don't, this is you from the future. Don't
well,
talk to
that's what I'm
so and
saying. But it's
so.
just
This
like,
person's going to break your
oh,
heart.
like cut off all your friends. And like, of course, my past self wouldn't do that because
Yeah, but why would you? I don't think you'd actually suggest that to
exactly,
your
because
past
there's no
self,
reason
right?
to.
But do you think there's something you would try to do? I guess in theory that would like save yourself from heartbreak or save yourself from some embarrassing moment, and you feel like your past self would be like, yeah, no, I'm not. I don't know.
I don't,
Like, I'm not going to follow through with that.
there's nothing specifically that I can think of, but also I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, okay. There is one thing that I can think of that I should be like, oh, don't do that. But like, I would probably take that advice, right? Um,
And I guess one last question in this particular segment is, what would you say you're most proud of now that you wouldn't have been able to see
like,
back
of
then?
that time period.
Like, what's something when you reflect back to that time, that tumultuous time of teenagehood, that you now can look back at fondly, that maybe back then you weren't as appreciative of or as aware of?
Honestly, I made a shit ton of money. And I definitely took it for granted. Like, I definitely should have saved more of it. Um, and like my parents would always tell me that, but I would not listen to them. So maybe
Save
that's a
up.
piece of advice that
Okay.
I would ignore. Um, is to be save more of your money. That I would ignore. But like, I made like so much money from all of that babysitting that I mentioned.
Okay. So something you could, I guess what you're saying is you appreciate your hard work and your determination, and I mean, how it turned out to be rather profitable, but you were willing to put in quite the time for something that you were passionate about.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was. it was what it was. I didn't dislike it at all, but yeah.
Okay, fair. Not every job is something of passion. And now that we're kind of getting towards the tail end here, I think it's a fair time to look ahead and kind of identify where we're heading and try to think towards the future. Because I think something that I've accepted is that part of being human and part of living life is always being willing to learn and always being willing to make mistakes and grow. So, what would you say is something that you're still learning to develop or become?
I think there's two answers that come to mind. Um, One of them is my patience. I think I can definitely learn and grow in being more patient. And I think that's something that you, as my partner, have experienced in me, that I'm not the most patient person. Um, but it's something that I can definitely learn and grow in. And then the other thing is my knitting. As over the last few years, I have grown more in my crochet skills. However, as we have learned recently, my knitting needs some work. So I think I should turn my attention now to my knitting.
Okay, so something that is more part of your relationships and part of who you are, and something that's also more of a practical hobby skill. Okay,
Yeah. So something more tangible and then something more personality wise, I guess.
that makes sense. Okay. Um, and finally, when so much of our life is so structured, it's what makes, I think, adulthood pretty scary for a lot of us, where we lose that structure and we're kind of thrown into the wild a little bit and have to figure things out on our own. So for so long, K through 12, even into the college years, growth is often measured numerically, um, through scores and testing. Now that you're at this stage of life, how do you measure growth?
Hmm. Um, I think that's interesting because once you have a life partner, I think it's much easier to ask your life partner for feedback. I know that that's something that you and I do each year, and even semi annually, is that we do reviews, and it's not necessarily of each other, but it's just like check ins and things like that for our household um, as a whole. And so I like to think of that as reviews of sorts. And obviously we don't, I mean, I hope this is obvious, but we don't give each other letter grades. But
No, we don't.
it's just to see how we're doing, right? And so I think that's, at least for me, I do find it a good way to measure how I'm doing, right? And I don't know if you think that as well, but um that for me is a good way to measure. And I think just overall, my mood each and every day, if I smile more than I frowned, if I um happy cry more than I sad cry, different things like that. If my general vibe is a good one more than a bad one, I think those are general ways to gauge how I'm doing. If my crochet work gets better, if my knitting work gets better, then those are all those are tangible ways that I've improved, right? Um, but I also know that I'm never going to reach levels of perfection in anything. So there's definitely always room to improve for each and everything.
I like that. I think that's a really um, succinct, tactful Maybe that's the word I'm thinking of. But I think it's a beautiful answer regardless. It's not something that is binary, um, which again I think goes back to what my question was all about. Is we have to essentially retrain ourselves or allow ourselves to find new ways to discover that growth and discover that we're still adapting and changing. Well, I want to thank you, Julia, for spending some time talking with me tonight. As usual, always appreciate your presence and spending quality time with you. Is there anything you want to conclude with on your side?
Nope. I wish there was a cat here so they can meow into the microphone, but they left me.
I saw some of
Yeah.
them walking out. So, well, thank you for being here. Thanks for listening to Catching Up, where the conversations continue beyond the classroom. I'll see you next time. I'm Peter Unji, and signing off.